Hello.
Hi. Well, welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're able to join us today for our Public Power Educational Forum. Today, Cody Peterson and myself will be your co-moderators for today's event. This event is sponsored by Protect Our Communities Foundation, Public Power San Diego County Democrats for Environmental Action, Sunrise Movement, La Jolla Dems Club, DSA, and San Diego 350. Today, we're here to learn more about public power as a community-owned utilities model for San Diego. Many of us don't think much about our electricity, and yet it's something we need day to day. Today's forum is to educate as many ratepayers from our energy experts with an option for public power at scale, with local control and more affordable than our current provider. I hope this information helps us all to understand the value of our alternative option with public power. We do have some public official representatives joining us today, and I'd like to acknowledge them before I give a brief description of our special energy expert guests. We will have from the County of San Diego Supervisor Chair Nathan Fletcher office, Supervisor Tara Lawson Reamer's office, Supervisor Nora Vargas office, and City of San Diego Councilmember Joe LaCava's office, Councilmember Marnie Von Wilper's office, Councilmember Vivian Marina's office, Councilmember Sean Ela Rivera's office, Councilmember Chris Cates' office, and San Diego Sustainability Department that's helped lead our efforts with San Diego Community Power, Cody Hoban. Also, we'll have Encinitas Councilmember Joe Mosca, Councilmember Kelly Hines, and representatives from Carlsbad, Councilmember Priya Bat Patel's office, and the City of Chula Vista. As well as our presenters, we have a fine group of presenters to give us an idea of what public power might look like in the city and what any challenges we may encounter along the road in order for us to actually obtain it. So on to our speakers. We have Bill Powers, a professional engineer, consulting engineer, advocate for community power, board member of Protect Our Communities Foundation. We have Ursula Schreiber, Vice President, Strategic Member Engagement and Education, American Public Power Association. Barry Moline, Executive Director of California Municipal Utilities Association, as well as Sean Ryan, the Executive Vice President at Arbion Energy Management. Now, related to time management for today, we're going to have approximately 2 to 3 questions that we take from the audience in between each speaker. Now, with as many people as we have attending, and we're glad you're all here, we won't be able to answer everyone's question, but what we'll do is we will follow up with our questions that you add in the chat by next Friday, by February 26th, as we convene with our energy experts today. So now, Cody Peterson will give us some of his thoughts on the topic and kick us off with the first presenter. Cody, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sonia. Let me just clarify right off the bat, I am speaking as president of the San Diego County Democrats for Environmental Action, and this does not reflect any opinions or ideas of my employers. So first of all, thank you for having me tonight, Sonia, and thanks everyone for coming. I think it's really an exciting panel that we have ahead. I just want to contextualize very briefly before introducing our first panelist. This is really, this has been an extraordinary last 6 months. I think anybody who was here in June or July of last year, where a 20-year, pretty much a 20-year repeat of the 1970 franchise agreement seemed inevitable. We really were able, in part through the work of the Better Franchise Coalition, and in part through public power and through the sort of leadership of our elected officials, we were able to open up a conjuncture at the end of last year, which is still open, in which a lot of things are possible that did not seem possible just 8 short months ago. And I think part of that is a tribute to the work of the activists, many of whom are on this call, But I think it's also a function not just of the fact that we were coming up on the end of a 50-year franchise agreement, but a lot of other factors. And I think I think the speakers tonight will speak to some of those. We have historically low interest rates. We have a shifting political ideology at the regional level, at the city level. We have a shifting composition of the council and of the mayor's office. So we'll talk a little as we go through this about that shifting landscape that we're seeing, and a lot of things are really like tumblers falling into place that really give us a lot of opportunities that did not seem like they would be in the wildest imagination possible. So. So with that, I'm going to introduce somebody who is really is a principal of as an engineer and the principal of Powers Engineering. But I think to look at his formal designation probably would underestimate just how fundamental this individual is to thinking about renewable energy in San Diego and really throughout the state. And that is our first panelist is Bill Powers. And Bill, anybody who's actually involved in solar and wind and thinking about the grid and thinking about alternative ways of generating and transmitting and distributing power and structuring power agencies. And really if there's any sort of, if there's really anybody like a sort of an Oz behind a Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, it is Bill Powers. He is really fundamental. Without Bill, there is no path to public power, and there's really few paths to really thinking deeply about energy at a fundamental level in San Diego, about renewable energy and thinking of an alternative future more broadly for energy in San Diego. So with that, I want to introduce Bill Powers as our first panelist. It's an honor to introduce you, Bill, and it's an honor to have you here tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Cody. I am going to see if I can get this presentation up and make sure everybody can see this. Everybody see that presentation?
Yes.
Good. Well, first, I'd like to really thank Sonia for all the work she put into this to make this a success. I'd like to thank Cody for his kind words. Hope I can live up to them. And for my co-speakers, we got a very eminent group of people that are speaking tonight. And Cody is right, I am a professional engineer, mechanical engineer, power systems. And some people might wonder, what's my motivation? And why do I do this? And my motivation is the energy crisis of 2020 or 2001. That was the real eye-opener for me about how vulnerable the community is if local watchdogs are not watching the shop. And that's been my motivation since that time. Back in the 80s, when I got out of engineering school, I worked for a federal public utility on military bases, Navy bases, Marine Corps bases, maintaining their systems, microgrids using ancient technology, but highly efficient. And went out after that on my own. I permitted several gas turbine power plants here in the San Diego area, Children's Hospital, Cogen, Grossmont, turbines on the border, El Cajon, Escondido. But that was really at the time this energy crisis occurred. And when I switched gears to getting much more involved in local advocacy and serving as an expert witness, often for nonprofits before the California Public Utilities Commission, and in getting engaged on the task force for the Climate Action Plan, and being an advocate for community choice energy. So with that small intro, I will go into my PowerPoint. So public power for the city of San Diego. Now is the right time. I want to look at 50 years of history of assessments about public power in the city. Got a good report last summer from the city's consultant, summarized that 50 years ago when the last franchise agreement was signed, the consultant had said, and I'll read, current high interest rates make a public buyout infeasible, re-examination advisable in future if interest rates are lower. Fast forward 50 years. Consultant last summer, today interest rates are extremely low. The best case city-owned electric distribution utility is economically, or the base case is economically feasible. And then finally, if the new proposed franchises are not accepted without material changes by a responsible bidder, then we recommend that the city proceed to form community-owned electric, gas, and distribution utilities. No conforming bids were received. So why would we, and what are the advantages of public power in San Diego? Local control, to me, that's fundamental. The California Public Utilities Commission does not regulate public utilities, even though, yes, public utilities are in the name. They actually regulate investor-owned, shareholder-owned utilities. If it's a local public utility, the local community sets policy. Lower rates, on average, rates are about 30% lower than San Diego Gas and Electric for public utilities in California. More accountability, utility management answers to local officials and citizens, not a statewide commission. Higher reliability. Public power customers average less than an hour a year without power, less than half the national average. And finally, a stronger local economy. Public utility will focus on project development in the community. So, are public utilities common in Southern California? Yes, they are. In the center is San Diego Gas and Electric Territory. To the east, Imperial Irrigation District, public utility. Immediately north, Anza Electric Co-op. And then a clutch of public power entities in the LA Basin area, LADWP, City of Anaheim, City of Riverside, City of Pasadena. There are many. And they vary in size. If you look at the center column, utility, the two biggest utilities in the state, Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, those are investor-owned utilities. The third largest is Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which is a public utility, followed by San Diego Gas and Electric, and then at a somewhat smaller scale, San Diego or Sacramento Municipal Utility District and Imperial Irrigation District. So San Diego Gas and Electric, very profitable, currently earning more than $1 million per day off of revenues from city residents. This chart is showing the very rapid growth in net profits by SDG&E. The lower bar, orange bar, is the revenue being earned from city residents. So how does that compare to other utilities in the state? This bar chart is looking at public utilities compared to SDG&E. SDG&E is on the left. This is 2019 data for residential rates. And you see SDG&E in the black bar. The green bar is the average public utility residential rate, and then individual bars for individual utilities, publicly owned utilities, off to the right. The SDG&E is about 30%, 33% on average higher than the average public utility rate. So let's now get into the some more of the specifics of what we might envision as a public utility for San Diego. But first, I'd like to begin with a critically important political issue for the city, which is many of us have invested a lot of time, energy, and money in the success of community choice energy, and which is now embodied in San Diego Community Power. I was on the task force that developed the Climate Action Plan, and the one specific vehicle that's identified in that plan for getting us to 100% clean energy by 2035 is community choice energy. Cities really pulled together to launch that program. San Diego Community Power, we all have a lot of high hopes for it. However, it is still impacted by decisions made at the California Public Utilities Commission and impacted by resistance from San Diego Gas and Electric and lack of cooperation on their part. That makes it tougher for SDG&E to offer competitive rates and tougher to do what's really central to me and many of the advocates here in the area, which is local clean power. That has been a big motivation behind seeking a public utility for San Diego, owning the wires. So the city's grid would no longer be under PUC jurisdiction or SDG&E control. And getting to the last but most important point, and hats off to former council member Barbara Bree, who in October of last year, at the time, there was a lot of confusion and uncertainty about, well, we've just spent years trying to launch San Diego Community Power. San Diego Community Power sells directly to customers of who otherwise get transmission and distribution service from San Diego Gas and Electric. But what will happen if the city becomes a public utility? Well, this is from the city attorney's office. As a municipal utility, the city can contract with San Diego Community Power to provide electricity for customers it serves, but it would be a wholesale transaction, meaning if San Diego Community Power were selling 6 million megawatt hours a year, spread over hundreds of thousands of individual customers, could sell the same 6 million megawatt hours per year to the public utility, which would then distribute it among the customer base in the city. So do we have any existing public utilities operating in San Diego or in the greater San Diego area? Yes. We have the city's Public Utilities Department, provides water and wastewater service to city residents. We have the Metropolitan Transit System, bus and trolley service. It's a joint powers authority. It's composed of 10 cities in the county. And then we have San Diego Community Power, electric power supply, joint powers authority, 5 cities, San Diego, Chula Vista, Imperial Beach, La Mesa, and Encinitas. So what are the structures used by public power utilities in California that could potentially be applied to the city? First example here is Sacramento Municipal Utility District. It's governed by an elected 7-member board of directors, completely independent of the city of Sacramento and other cities in the county of Sacramento. Imperial Irrigation District also is governed by an elected 5-member board of directors, independent of cities in Imperial County. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power has a different structure, governed by a 5-member board of water and power commissioners. They're appointed by the mayor of Los Angeles and confirmed by the city council. And then Pasadena Water and Power, another example, governed by Pasadena City Council, not unlike our own public utilities department. So what are franchise fees? This has been a big deal in San Diego, the issue of concern about losing franchise fees, withholding franchise fees, what will happen with franchise fees. 1, if we don't sign a franchise agreement. 2, if we become a public power entity. Well, fundamentally, the franchise fees are paid for use of the city's land to conduct business. The franchise fees in San Diego have 2 components. One is the fees for that function. 3% of the sales are collected as a franchise fee. That's about just under $64 million a year in 2020, which is directed to the city's general fund. There is a comparable fee that is collected. It's specifically earmarked for undergrounding and is collected as an undergrounding fee. An important point here, last bullet, SDG&E collects these fees from city residents and transfers them to the city. These fees are not paid out of SDG&E's revenues. They're collected from residents and passed on to the city. So how would a public utility handle this? There are numerous schemes, numerous levels of fees that are passed on to city governments. But the one that I find most attractive, one among a number of options, is Austin Energy, City of Austin, Texas. Public utility. This public utility passes on over 9% of its sales revenue to the City of Austin's general fund, and they explain why, and I quote it here in this bullet. The dividend is comparable to funds distributed to stockholders and investor-owned utilities. And for those that don't know, typical rule of thumb is that investor-owned utilities are guaranteed a 10% return on their revenue as profit. And City of Austin is doing something comparable, returning it to the general fund or contributing it to the general fund, City of Austin, for basic services, police, fire, emergency medical, parks, and libraries. So this next slide is looking at, so let's say we did something similar with a public utility in the city of San Diego. 10% of the public utility sales are transferred to the general fund. That's about $150 million a year, following Austin Energy's framework. This assumes that our rates are about 20% lower with this public utility entity than with currently with SDG&E. The franchise fee collection would be eliminated. Those revenues are now coming as a transfer from the public utility. We'd maintain our general fund contribution about where it is now, $65 to $70 million a year. We would definitely improve the efficiency of the undergrounding program. So with $30 or $40 million a year, we can underground the same amount of mileage in urban San Diego. And I just want to point out here that representative public utility cost to underground under $3 million per mile. The reference I'm using here is Sacramento Municipal. The link, and we'll put this PowerPoint up on the Protect Our Communities Foundation website, make it generally available. Sacramento Municipal Utility has got a great sequence of pictures before and after of some of these undergrounding projects, but they're doing them for $2.8 million a mile. City of San Diego is paying $4.5 to $6 million per mile. And this is just an unacceptably high cost to continue this program. An efficient program, achieving the same cost efficiencies as a public utility, we can get the same job done for $40 million a year. What does that mean? That means it leaves another $40 million a year available for other activities. For example, the Climate Equity Fund. Hats off to our city council for approving a climate equity fund, pioneered by Council Member Moreno. It's a great start, but we can make that fund much bigger with this type of approach. So what is the value of SDG&E's distribution assets in the city? And what will we have to pay to buy those assets and convert the wires into a city function, city property? There have been two independent assessments of market value. One was done last year by the mayor's or the city's consultant, and one was done 4 years ago, approximately, funded by a nonprofit in town, Power Services 2017. They were recommended by the city of Boulder, Colorado, which was pursuing municipalization at the time. Both of these market value assessments came in at about $2 billion. Another part of this is there are numerous substations around San Diego that share loads between adjacent cities or the county, such as National City, La Mesa, Poway, the county, Escondido. And you need to separate out and apportion the electricity between the loads that are in the city and outside of the city. That's called separation. There are cost estimates in both of these proposals for that function, ranging from as little as $200 million to an average of about $400 million. Combined, buying the assets, doing the separations in the range of about $2.5 billion. So we have a good idea what these assets are worth. This is just an example of a field work that was done in that 2017 study, where the consultant went out and looked at the substations that are in the periphery of San Diego, got familiar with the hardware to be able to make an educated guess as to how much time and effort and money would be required to do this separation. This happens to be a substation up in Rancho Penasquitos. Okay, so we know how much the assets are worth. How do we pay for these assets? They would be paid for through revenue bonds, customer bill payments pay off the bonds over 30 years or 40 years or 25 years, a long term. And importantly, this has come up in many discussions in San Diego. Well, how do we pay for it? Where would these billions of dollars come from? Not feasible. It's important to go back to a statement in the report commissioned by the city last year. The purchase price assumption does not have significant effect on the cost customers would pay for electric service. This is because fixed asset costs, debt service, are a small portion of the total cost of service, that when this is amortized over many years and many customers, it's a relatively small cost. Power Service is estimated approximately 3 cents per kilowatt hour. A retail residential rate in San Diego, or San Diego Gas and Electric, is over 30 cents a kilowatt hour. So it puts in perspective what it means to purchase this asset. So who would run it? How would we run it? Well, one way to do that initially is to hire a private contractor, another public utility, to staff it and manage it until the city can start putting its own personnel in to take over that function. You would want to use people that are most knowledgeable of the system. That system is currently run by SDG&E. We would want to use mid-level management people from SDG&E to join and be a part of that staff. We would want the operations and maintenance staff to be SDG&E workers, union workers, honoring their existing collective bargaining agreements so that we have the people that we need. Last section, we're in the home stretch. I'd like to, not surprisingly, there's plenty of pushback about the idea of going to public power in San Diego. SDG&E sent a letter to the Environment Committee before they were briefed on the elements of the bid package last July. A fairly voluminous letter and had a lot of points in it about why public power is not a good idea for the city. And I want to review some of those points before wrapping up my presentation. Number one, it would potentially saddle San Diego taxpayers with years of expensive litigation. That would only happen if SDG&E chose to challenge and obstruct the transition to public power. City would be burdened with billions of dollars in new financial obligations. Again, the purchase would be through revenue bond that would be paid by the utility customers, not City of San Diego funds. San Diego region has been largely protected from wildfires because of SDG&E's focus and execution of a wildfire mitigation plan. They've been putting a lot of effort into that, but it's important to remember the region was devastated by fires caused by SDG&E in 2007. And now there's a heavy reliance by the utility on preventive fire shutoffs, which cuts power to customers in their hour of need when we have high winds and tight conditions. So the obligation to serve still needs to be met for those customers that are affected. Claim, the risks associated with the operation of a natural gas utility are well illustrated by the deadly explosion in 2010 of a PG&E natural gas line. PG&E mismanagement caused the explosion. This is an example of private utility incompetence, not a reason to trust a private utility. Finally, the claim, NewGen report commissioned by the city, issued last summer, grossly undervalues SDG&E assets, not a proxy for fair market value. Well, we have NewGen study, we have the Power Services study, very similar in their assessment of market value. Claim, NewGen report completely discounts the time and cost of separation. Not the case. The NewGen report presents a range. The Power Services report presents a range. They spent considerable time to develop that estimate. So in sum, there's no better time for the city of San Diego to move to public power. The preliminary public power feasibility studies that I've discussed that have been done for the city are favorable to forming a public power utility. At this point, the city needs to develop a detailed, actionable public power implementation plan so we can dig in to that possibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. This is a great presentation. Received some great feedback while you were presenting of how well this information is digestible. So we do have some questions from the audience, and I want to go ahead and ask a question that we received. And the question reads, if the city were to become its own power provider and buy the wires from SDG&E, but the wires outside of the city would still be owned by SDG&E, is SDG&E legally obligated to ensure connectivity to the rest of the Cal ICO grid?
Wow, that's quite a question. They're definitely legally obligated to stay connected to the California Independent System Operator grid, the rest of the grid in the state. They're regulated, SDG&E is a regulated utility by the California Public Utilities Commission. They're under the dispatch authority of the California Independent System Operator. Yes, they must stay connected.
Awesome. And I do have another question from our audience. And this question asks, is how would a switch to CCE or public governance impact employees, MOUs, as well as labor agreements? Do you have any information we can share on that?
I can't speak for the city, officially, but it is the labor agreements that currently exist with SDG&E should and would be honored by a public utility in San Diego. We need those workers. I mean, they know the system. I know the IBEW union that represents the SDG&E electricians. IBEW 465 also represents the Imperial Irrigation District electricians. That is a public utility. So there's no conflict with honoring those collective bargaining agreements and encouraging employees to join unions and be a part of that.
Great. Cody, do you have a question you would also like to propose?
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. I think some of our listeners probably don't adequately understand the role of the CPUC in this equation and the constraints set by the CPUC. I wonder if you could maybe talk briefly about the parameters that the CPUC has set and the sort of the way in which they are a sort of pervasive element of calculation in relation to our investor-owned utility.
That is an excellent request. And the California Public Utilities Commission exerts almost exclusive regulatory authority over shareholder-owned utilities, investor-owned utilities. The primary utilities of that type in the state are Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California Electric, San Diego Gas and Electric. And anything that has to do with rates, anything that has to do with new projects, that is exclusively regulated by the PUC or the California PUC. And as a result, the city is really little more than an observer as to what is happening in terms of rates, new projects, and very little real control over its destiny in energy. The San Diego Community Power Law was passed in the wake of the 2000-2001 crisis that allowed political jurisdictions, counties, cities to form their own power provision entities, community choice energy. We have one now, San Diego Community Power. That was a response to the tremendously negative reaction in the state to what happened in that crisis, to give more control to local entities for power provision. However, the wires stay with the investor-owned utility, and the commission, Public Utilities Commission, has been sympathetic to the investor-owned utilities in this back and forth with this new entity, Community Choice Energy. They made it tough, and they're making it tough for San Diego Community Power and other entities like it to be all they can be. And if we are a local public utility, we can assist them enthusiastically in being all they can be.
Great question. A response. Sounds like the Marines, right? Or is that the Army?
We will take them. We will take them to support us as well.
Okay, so Bill, can I ask if you can, since your presentation is concluded, that we can pull this down so we can get ready for our next speaker? Thank you so much. And so while I'm getting ready for our next speaker, Cody, I think we have time for maybe one more question, if you have one. If not, we can just move on to the next. next guest speaker.
Oh, I did actually have a question that I think Bill could maybe answer, which is to say, one of the things that has been burdensome, as you pointed out, is the role of exit fees as stipulated by the CPUC in relation to community choice aggregation or energy. How would a public utility, how would public power deal with exit fees?
Good question.
Good question. It was unclear. There is some uncertainty there how that would be negotiated. I know that the city's report from last summer said that, you know, depending on legal interpretation, there may be no basis for exit fees on city residents going to public power. It's unclear that the San Diego Gas and Electric customers that now get their power from San Diego Community Power, they are paying exit fees. And just to back up on this so that people understand, a lot of these exit fees should not have happened. I was an expert witness in that proceeding. These exit fees are associated with bloated renewable energy contracts that we should not have paid anywhere near what we paid for them. That those were all negotiated in a confidential way. We have gas turbine power contracts, Carlsbad, Pio Pico, Otay Mesa, very expensive power that not only was not needed in my opinion, but definitely not at the price. So there's a whole nother issue of these exit fees even being legitimate. But the issue of whether we would have to pay them as public power customers is uncertain.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for, again, being here. And we have our next speaker is Ursula Schreiber, and she is from Americans Public Power Association, and I'll allow her to provide more details of her background. And it is a great honor that we're able to have her with us today.
All right, thanks, Sonia. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm Ursula Schreiber. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Member Engagement and Education with the American Public Power Association. APPA is a trade association representing the 2011 public power utilities in the US. We represent them on Capitol Hill, and we provide information and education to them to help them better meet the needs of their customers. In terms of municipalization, you know, we do think it's very important for communities to understand the benefits of public power so they can make an informed decision. That decision may be to pursue the public power option, or it may be to negotiate with their incumbent utility. We don't weigh in on that. We just are here as a resource to provide information on public power. Sonia, you can go ahead and go to the next slide after that as well. So tonight I'm just going to provide a couple examples of communities that have formed public power utilities, and also some that have negotiated and come to an agreement with their incumbent utility, just to provide a flavor of the different types of options out there. And you'll see as I go through these, there are all different motivations, models, different ways that you can meet the needs of your community. You know, each community is individual, and, you know, there's not one right way, but I think it's good to see that there are different options out there and help that inform your decision making. Over the last several years, there has been good interest in municipalization and public power, but I'd say that has been pretty consistent over the last couple decades. We are contacted by dozens of communities every year interested in public power. It may be just learning about what public power is. Some may be going through feasibility studies. Some may be having a referendum. It all, you know, it runs the gamut. But really, when it comes down to it, while there are always a lot of discussions, changes in utility ownership are quite rare. You know, they do happen, but, you know, every couple of years, a new public power utility will form. But it's definitely a process, and it requires commitment, and it doesn't happen every day. And often once communities begin considering the public power option and start exploring municipalization, the incumbent utility often will offer some concessions to encourage the community to abandon those efforts. And in some cases, those, as you'll see later, some of those concessions may make it worthwhile for the community to not pursue the public power option. But obviously, there are a lot of situations where public power utilities have formed, and it's been extremely valuable to the community. So I'll just run through a couple examples here first on successful municipalization efforts. First up, Jefferson County PUD in Washington is the most recent public power utility to form in 2013. Economic development and environmental options, more access to renewables were the driving factors in this particular municipalization effort. Jefferson County is somewhat unique in that the community came to an agreement with the incumbent utility through negotiations. Under state law, the PUDs have the right to eminent domain to acquire private utilities, but the commissioners in Jefferson County felt that they wanted to try to negotiate first, even though the incumbent utility was opposed to selling the system initially. They felt that the negotiated terms would provide a smoother transition for the customers and be more efficient and potentially lower the transfer costs than if they were to have pursued condemnation. And so after a year of negotiations, which is a very quick time frame in terms of the municipalization process, the two sides agreed on a purchase price. And by negotiating, they were able to avoid any legal battles, PR battles that are very common in municipalization efforts. And so the new utility has been very successful in helping the local economy. They've added new jobs. It's also enhanced by the commitment of the community to purchase supplies locally whenever possible. The second example, Winter Park, Florida. They have almost 14,000 customers. They formed in 2005 after a 6-year effort to take over the electric distribution system. The motivation in Winter Park was primarily related to reliability. They had persistent problems with the incumbent utility. There were a lot of outages. The private utilities franchise agreement was coming to an end, and the franchise agreement included a clause allowing the city to buy the system at the end of that agreement. So residents voted overwhelmingly to form the public power utility, and they began operations, as I mentioned, in 2005. Initially, the city contracted with another company, Enco Utility Services, to operate the utility under a 12-year contract. And their commitment was really to improving reliability by typically by undergrounding power lines. After the 12-year contract expired, they assumed responsibility for operating the utility internally, and they hired staff to do it themselves. So it was really just, they took that 12 years to really, get a solid understanding of running the utility, and so they had that experience when they decided to assume responsibility themselves. The third example here, Hermiston, Oregon, formed in 2001 after a 4-year effort. Their effort began after the local investor-owned utility decided to close its local customer service centers, and which resulted in a decline in service. While the incumbent utility did fight the condemnation proceedings, in the end, the court ruled in favor of the city, and the utility agreed to sell the system for $8 million, which was about twice the book value of the utility itself. In the first year of operations, the city reduced the customers' rates, and the rates of the public power utility are still considerably lower than the investor-owned utility that served that community. Long Island Power Authority, this is another rather unique one. LIPA is the largest public power utility formed in many years. They have over 1 million customers. LIPA was created as an act of the state legislature and acquired the transmission and distribution system from the Long Island Lighting Company. They were very successful in reducing rates, focused on reliability and economic development, safety when they took over the system. They are unique in that they utilize a public-private partnership model, and they contract with PSEG Long Island to operate, which is an investor-owned utility, to operate LIPA's system under a 12-year contract. They're actually in the process of reviewing that now, determining whether to re-sign that contract, to find another company to run the utility, or to actually start operating the system itself and hire more staff to do that themselves. So that's a very unique model. We don't see too many of these public-private partnerships, but that's a good example of how a really large utility can do that. And then the last one is another unique example. It's Clyde, Ohio, formed in 1989, but they are unique in that they created a duplicate system. Rates were very high, and high rates were definitely the driver in that situation. The city began to explore the municipalization process, but the incumbent utility wanted $40 million for the system of 2,600 customers. And so the city had received bids to construct a new system for $3.5 million. So they built a duplicate system, and citizens in the community can opt for one utility or the other. It's their choice. And 5 years after Clyde took over its system, the rates were 30% lower on the public power side, and the vast majority of the town had switched over to the public power utility. So these are just a few examples, but they just show just a wide variety of ways that you can go about this, and ways that you can make a public power utility that works for your community. There's not just one right way to do it. There are multiple different methods and formats of doing this. So next, I'm going to turn to some of the communities that didn't necessarily succeed in forming the public power utility, but found that in just exploring the option, they were able to improve the community situation and achieve concessions from the incumbent utility. Some of the concessions they can include lower rates. You'll see they could be reliability improvements, renewable energy. Whatever the issue that is important to your community is what you want to, when you're thinking about either renegotiating your franchise agreement or exploring municipalization. It's very important to understand what are your goals and what are you trying to get out of this. So I'm just going to run through 3 quick examples of cities that have used kind of the municipalization process as a negotiating tool. Castleberry, Florida is the first one. After 2 years of trying to renew its franchise agreement with Progress Energy, the city council voted to begin buyout proceedings in 2013. This motivated Progress Energy to improve its offer, and just that year, the city accepted a new agreement, which included a higher franchise fee, reimbursement of $1.75 million in expenses that were incurred during the franchise agreement while it was in dispute, and then a favored nations clause entitling the city to a better deal if the utility gives a better deal to another municipality. The city also secured a mandate for a reliability study every 5 years to evaluate the utility service, and had requirements that those be improved if they weren't meeting the stated requirements. Wichita, Kansas, they explored municipalization in 2001. They had very high rates, and there were some additional rate increases that were being proposed. And so they began looking at the public power option. The city released a municipalization feasibility study showing that it could save as much as $650 million in electricity costs over 20 years if they municipalized. And so the study provided leverage for the city to negotiate a rate decrease, which actually gave customers about 85% of the rate relief that the consultant study said it could achieve if it were to take over the system. And so rather than going through the lengthy battles and process of municipalizing, they felt that gave them what they needed in that franchise agreement. And then finally, Minneapolis, Minnesota, in 2014, they are served by 2 investor-owned utilities. And they were one of these 2 utilities to support the city's clean energy goals. Both franchise agreements were set to expire at the end of the year, and community leaders used the evaluation of public power as leverage. And as a result, the city forged a strategic partnership with these 2 utilities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2025 and by 80% by 2050. And so, my objective today is really just to demonstrate that there are so many different options available to communities in evaluating your future. This can be municipalization structured in a variety of ways, some of which I highlighted. can be negotiating with the incumbent utility to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. And the most important thing is to realize that each community is unique. You have your goals and objectives, and it's important to keep those in mind as you're going through this process, and decide what is the best way for you to achieve that. Public power is obviously a great option in terms of local decision making, local control, being able to focus on the issues that are important to your community. But if there is a way to achieve that in other ways, then those are always worth considering as well. And then I would just like to commend Bill. I thought you did a really nice job explaining the benefits of public power and the process. And I thought it was extremely well presented. And it sounds like you have a lot of great information and a lot of good ideas there. And with that, I will go ahead and take any questions.
So I think I'll ask, hey, we got some COVID moderating issues here. So I have a couple of questions. Thank you so much, Ursula. That was wonderful. So, there are some tensions, obviously, in some cases between cost savings. There are some tensions, obviously, between. I'm going to lock it out. There are some tensions, obviously, between navigating between cost savings and. Hey, you're about to get locked out.
What did I do?
This is unbelievable. This is a complete breakdown of parental authority here. So there's obviously some tensions between decarbonization on the one hand and cost savings on the other. And probably different authorities navigate that in different ways. Can you sort of generalize a little about how communities have navigated that in terms of, is this overall, is public power a means of accelerating decarbonization? Have communities kind of turned away from that and sought cost savings, or is it just too varied to kind of characterize?
Yeah, it varies. I mean, and that's really the benefit of public power. It's local decision making, being able to meet the needs of your community. Some communities may decide that lower rates are the most important thing to their community, and so they pursue that. Other communities will decide that they want renewable energy, or they want to focus on reliability. It runs the gamut, and that really speaks to the benefits of public power and being able to make those decisions that are right for your community. And the community can weigh in, in city council meetings, they have a say. And if the utility isn't addressing those needs, then they can make change. They can, vote elected officials in and out of office to actually have influence over what those decisions are that the utility is making.
So I have a question here. I've read that there are, in general, overall, about 7% reduced rates between public power and investor-owned utilities. In general, what are the sources of the main sources of cost savings for public utilities?
Well, the main source of the savings is really its not-for-profit status and not having shareholders that we provide, a dividend to. That's one of the primary reasons. In addition to that, local scrutiny over operations. You typically don't see an investor or a public power CEO or general manager making, a couple $1 million a year. There are just efficiencies. Once again, there's oversight on a local level from the city council or the governing board, making sure that expenses are being watched and that they're not being wasteful, and that they're focused on the community and providing as low rates, or as whether it's low rates or, like I said before, focus on renewables, but it's really focused on what's important to the community and how and the local oversight, really.
Presumably, you also don't get the kind of capital churn you get when the CPUC is giving a guaranteed 10.2% return on equity. There's a perverse incentive to actually churn capital projects just to get your 10.2 return. I have a question too about the difference between a city-run utility and a district's, but maybe we could expand that out to talk about joint power authorities versus districts versus municipal. How have communities sort of selected between those, and what are the advantages, if you can characterize them?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to defer that question to Barry Moline, because a lot of those public utility districts and different types of entities are more specific to California. And so, I think different states have different models, and that's really specific to either the Pacific Northwest or California. Most other areas of the country are municipal utilities. There are some county-wide ones, but that really, I think, is more specific to California.
Okay, so I will table that for Barry's Q&A. Maybe I could ask a question. Are we probably short on time here? But maybe one more question about this time in general. We see extraordinarily low interest rates. Is this a time that you see across the country? Is it particularly favorable for the formation of public power agencies?
I think honestly, like I said at the beginning, it's been very constant. I've been at APPA 25 years, and there's just been a constant interest over the years. I do think having some of these larger communities like Boulder, Colorado, New York, Chicago, kind of looking at public power, and particularly Boulder, since they were very serious and very dedicated to the effort. I think that has raised the profile and really showed that public power is an option. And I think that's important, just to get the idea out there, so communities know that there are options out there. And particularly at a time when your franchise agreement is coming to an end, it's a really good time to look at what your options are and make sure that you're getting what you need from your utility, because it's much easier to handle these negotiations or make change when your franchise agreement is coming to an end. So, to answer your question, I don't know that there's any more interest now. It's really been very constant, but there is definitely a lot of interest right now.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ursula. And if you could stay on hand for additional questions, if we get them, that'd be wonderful. We really appreciate it. Sonia, would you like to take the reins on Erevan?
Yes, our next guest, absolutely. Again, thank you, Ursula. She is showing more sacrifice and attending for us today, with her actually being in the Eastern Seaboard. So she mentioned the DC area, so they're 3.5 hours ahead of us. So our next speaker is Sean Ryan, and he's with Crossover Energy Partners, which is I guess a new name rather than Arvion, but they are an energy management company. And Sean, take it away for us. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sonia. And Ursula, I appreciate everything that you just contributed, and I couldn't have teed it up better. We were a big participant in the Boulder, Colorado process, and so there was a lot of work done there, and I think the way you explained it around them kind of really paving the path in terms of going about municipalization and public power, and bringing in the private capital communities to help them do that was, I think it was pretty unique. There's still a ways to go, and of course, global pandemics don't help anything in terms of progress on those types of fronts. But anyway, thank you for that. Sonia, I apologize. We are in our company in the midst of a name change. So we are now Crossover Energy Partners, and I'll kind of give a little bit of an overview of our organization and what we do. We were formerly known as Arevon Energy Management. We are the service arm of a large private equity firm that is really committed to deploying capital in the renewable energy space. We're also in the process of working with another private equity firm to do similar work. But essentially, we're a small group of folks that are dedicated to really what we like to call as grid parity 2.0, right? So this is the next evolution of the renewable energy space and energy space in general, right? I mean, we all in the renewables industry, right? We understand solar and wind as really providing, you know, this very first push into creating a new source and generation supply of energy. But what's next, right? And a big part of that is really focused on energy as a service and energy as a supply for in a lot of instances public power and municipal power organizations. So you know, that's our focus has been shifting from really just a project-based kind of industry to a service-based industry, and really thinking of it as how can we bring private capital to bear to holistically serve, you know, organizations like a San Diego Community Power, as well as a San Diego municipal public power entity. So they're both they can work together. You know, Bill had touched on that a little bit, and we'll go into a little bit more later on. But we did grow up in the traditional renewable energy development space. We did a lot of work pulling together solar projects, wind projects, landfill gas projects, working with our customers to come together and define contracts that work for both parties. We've done a lot of work on the operations and maintenance space, so we understand what it takes to operate a large fleet of energy generation. And let's see, we'll go. So the city of Boulder. So we started working with the city, and this was, I was not a party to this. I've been with the organization since 2012, but really on the energy management side and the origination side only for the last year or so. Our efforts with the city of Boulder started well before that, and working with them closely to identify a lot of what are the things that they want to accomplish with going public with their energy supply and with their distribution. You know, a lot of it was really focused around these particular items here, right? How could, and this is a theme I think that we've all kind of seen through the course of the evening, and that is, you know, first and foremost, I think a lot of it is around value, right? And that's really, most people associate that with cost and with price. So what is the value that can be added to the community by bringing on their own power source or distributed generation supply, et cetera. Second was really creating a clean generation, so renewable based. You know, they had really high goals of 100% renewable electricity for their community, and that coupled with a lot of distributed generation as well, right? And that gets into the third piece here, which is local. The benefits that come with, you know, developing a local generation and supply plan are you know, astronomical, right? You can work with the local, you know, training community to develop our workforce. You can create investment opportunities for the local community. There's a lot of different things that you can do when you start focusing on the local level. And then lastly, reliability, right? That's one that, you know, in California, I think we're all very keenly aware of in terms of resiliency, reliability, the public system power shutoffs, and you know, generally in tune to the fact that that's probably only getting worse, and how can we address it now and make it better. So we started working with the city of Boulder early on to develop this plan. They had brought on other consultants as well, but we were bringing the perspective of the private capital side. What is it that we would need in order to help support their effort from a capital standpoint? And a lot of that is around certainty. The more certain the investment from private capital, the lower the return requirements are on I-side, and the more we can do with that capital. So we started really kind of mashing that up with Boulder and understanding a lot about how can we make those two pieces combine and have a valid public partnership model going forward. I mean, ultimately, as was suggested and as respected, it needed to go through a public process. We just wanted to be a part of helping the broader community as a whole understand what was needed. And as my understanding is, Boulder is still working through that process. And as I mentioned, the pandemic hasn't helped much, but they'll get there. That's the hope of everyone. Here I tried to touch on some of the process that they've the Boulder specifically has gone through, but also we are trying to work through this with a lot of other communities. This is part of our strategic alignment on our grid parity 2.0 idea, on the evolution to that next phase of energy supply and load serving. In that process, again, these are all things that I think have been touched on pretty regularly this evening. The very first step can be really challenging, and that's the determination of the value with the incumbent utility, right? What is the regulatory input required? What are the hurdles you need to go through? And Ursula touched on it, right? Can you negotiate those in good faith with the counterparty, or does it something that will ultimately require legal intervention? We've seen in Colorado, not just with Boulder, but in other instances where customers are focused on this type of effort, the threat of being drug out in a really long legal battle is challenging. So, okay, you get through that, the valuation and the settlement of that piece. Well, now you still have to go through that acquisition process, right? I mean, if it's condemnation or if it's if it is something that, all the better. But that's definitely something that's challenging. Then you've got the two follow-on pieces there are, okay, you're over that peak. Now you've got to start going through that organizational effort and try to pull together the startup needs, what from a physical infrastructure standpoint as well as an operational standpoint. How do you prepare to assume your own power and energy distribution? And a lot of that, can be really challenging to navigate, right? There's a lot of regulatory oversight in the energy space. There's a lot of things, one of the questions that was brought up was around CAISO and their authority over SDG&E maintaining that connection, which, as Bill said, exists and it fully does. There's open access to transmission, but that also leads to a lot of other regulatory components to the process. So, our proposal to the city of Boulder was for what's termed a full requirements PPA. That's a power purchase agreement that follows their load throughout the course of the day, month, year, and so on. And we execute. The more certainty there is around the duration of that contract, the more we can be aligned on cost and on value. Our focus is really on long-term ownership and long-term commitment to our customers and our partners. And so, the intent is that we can look out 10, 15, 20, even 30 years in some instances to really make it financially suitable, as well as fit within the individual frameworks. Some communities have a really challenging effort, or they have one of their challenging hurdles is looking beyond 5 years. That's kind of part of the city mandate with some of the customers we've talked to. We do have a partnership on the distributed generation side. So we do a lot of work trying to integrate local distributed generation with a larger utility scale application of the PPA. and it helps reduce the cost. You get the economies of scale blended in with the local effort. You know, I can buy solar panels at a price that's 70% less than what a local supplier can, but we engage with local vendors to be able to do the installation, do the maintenance, do all the work that's required for the installation. The one of the biggest pieces here that benefits that our organization brings to this type of situation is the capital requirement, right? Today, it's no secret that communities are strapped. There's a lot of budget concern. I live in a community in the school district that my kids go to. We have meetings, twice a month about how we're going to cope with the upcoming challenges and the challenges we've had. Right, this is real. My town of Alameda, we're actually our own municipal utility, but we have lots of hurdles that we have to come up against in terms of budget. And so, if you can use that public-private partnership model to help hedge against some of these financial risks, it becomes more palatable, and that particular piece then gets taken off the table, and we are more than open book about it. And it's a return that we require on our capital that we're open about again, and we can be transparent in the way that operates, especially if this is a partnership that's going to last, like I said, up to 30 years. So, a lot of this here, I think, has been touched on by a few of the conversations. And again, I'll just bring it from the private capital standpoint. We can help bring that, or private capital can help bridge that gap between, well, can we do this feasibly? We recognize the value in it, and how do we accomplish that while still managing the risk associated with a $3 billion investment is nothing to laugh at. So there's a lot to be said there. I will touch briefly on some of the other efforts that we've had underway, so you can kind of see, and Ursula had a few other great examples as well of where where other communities have looked to municipalization or public power, and some of the things that we've helped really in this proposal process and in the development of these, what we've seen as things that are big focuses of the community, and how we've worked to address them. I think the one that I have been very close to and would like to touch on is the local generation and the local workforce development pieces, right? I mean, I saw in the comments there's a lot of concern around labor. Valid, right? It always is, especially in California. Our cost of living is high. There's a lot of challenges associated with it. What we've worked on with a lot of communities, the city of Chicago was one, trying to develop a way to really encourage and not just throw money at a problem, but really encourage workforce development. We partnered with the local IBEW in Chicago to really try to understand what training efforts they had going to develop their renewable energy, solar specifically, workforce. They have a great training center that was funded through some of their partnerships to help train the underserved communities on installing solar and like not just on rooftops, and also on large like utility scale applications. There's a lot that can go into that, and there's a lot of labor required for those larger projects. San Diego is located in a great place for both from a resource perspective as well as the market is in a good place for large scale generation, and you have that workforce trained that it can be applied very, very quickly and easily. We also, with Chicago, had come up with a lot of funding efforts and training efforts with other local stakeholders to get the underserved communities into the classroom to learn about, the fundamentals of electrical theory and, providing scholarships to local schools that showed real promise in a particular field, and dedicating a certain amount to that. So there's a lot that is done in when you have control, and you have control over the process for being able to do local generation, right? When you have the control over the interconnection process for either behind the meter or in front of the meter energy generation in your service territory, it makes all the difference. Yeah, I think those are a lot of the things that we have been doing and that we've seen in the public power sector to really try to advance this idea that energy supply is evolving, and the public power is definitely a way that it can evolve and into the next generation of load serving. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have a few questions in the chat, and there's a couple questions that relate to the distinction between a traditional investor-owned utility and sort of equity firm like yourselves. How would you sort of distinguish those two levels of engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, the biggest one in my mind is, being an investor-owned utility, you have a responsibility to shareholders, and that responsibility is ever present. It's if you can increase your return on the shares or increase the dividend, then you use every opportunity to do that. In a private equity in the private equity space, it's really, you have this capital that you're ready and willing to invest in something, and once you make that investment, you're watching it and you're cultivating it with your partner, but you're not constantly trying to find new ways to make that capital grow, if that makes sense. It is committed to a certain effort, and that's it. And hopefully you've done your due diligence and you've done a lot of work to ensure that investment is appropriate. If the return requirement is comparable, or its relationship to the risk that we assume is, they're proportionate. But like I was saying, you take out the more you mitigate that risk, the lower that return requirement comes, and the more we're capable of just supporting the effort and not really getting in the weeds.
I see. So, okay. That's in essence, this is one way or another, the municipality would have to offer, the municipality would have to offer or put a bond before the public to generate those funds, or they would seek an investor.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see it as, I think there's a real decent similarity between a bond investment and, going to a private equity investor like us. It's the differences in the market that's looking at it, right? Our investors are long-term. A lot of instances, they're pension funds. The state teachers retirement fund has been a big investor in these projects in the past, versus bringing a bond to the open muni bond market.
So and to be clear, so far as I understand it, Public Power San Diego is not in any way endorsing this option versus a bond option, but Sean's here to provide information, just to clarify some comments here.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, I've been just interested in what happens in the energy industry in California and nationally, and for my career has been in renewable energy, and spoke with Bill recently, and he was like, hey, would you be willing to share with us your thoughts on the private capital markets and its ability to work with public power?
And do you think, I got a private question here. Do you think, how does the litigation environment affect the overall viability? I know a lot of municipalities have been spooked by, and I know that SDG&E has expressly sort of threatened litigation in their public communications. How do you see that litigation environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. It it really completely depends on the relationship with the community on our part, right? In some instances, the community says, we don't need your support. We don't want it to look like there's any nefarious actions happening here. Stand back. We'll let you know when we're ready to move forward, and we're more than respectful of that. In other instances, we can bring capital to support those efforts if it's necessary, and it's above board, right? Where there's yeah.
I have a question here, which I only partially understand. Does CEP promote wholesale feed-in tariffs as advocated for San Diego by the Clean Coalition in the SEIN study as a vehicle to expand local solar and storage facilities? I'm saying those words. I do not entirely understand the question.
Unfortunately, I can't say that I followed that very well. I think it's over here in the side, right?
I know Jay Powell to be a very well-informed individual, though, so it's not.
Yeah, I think that personally, I think feed-in tariffs have a place. I having seen a lot of net metering quarrels over the years, and understandable, right? I think that there is a place where that we move beyond the net metering rules and into a feed-in tariff world. It's challenging. There's a lot of nuances to both sides of that argument. I do, from a personal standpoint, right? I'll fly into the Oakland airport and I fly over a whole bunch of empty rooftops. And those rooftops are empty because, and it's not because somebody didn't go talk to that building owner, it's because there's no load. The building, it has to be under a PPA scenario. Behind the meter doesn't work. The credit counterparty, or the counterparty credit is in question. There's a lot of different things that go into being able to put solar on a building. If you have a feed-in tariff scenario, that is, you take away a lot of that, and it really becomes, can the building support the electricity? Can it physically support the system? Can that local distribution grid support the injection of energy at that point? Those are things that the incumbent IOUs have a real hard time providing that information, and it's not part of it. Not to just totally badmouth the IOUs on that point. It's hard, right? There's a power, and energy is a very finicky thing, and you don't want to disrupt it in a way that really causes a lot of consternation to your customers. And so I understand why they have a lot of when somebody talks about interconnecting into their distribution grid, they start squirming. But when you have control over it, you can start pairing that feed-in tariff model with the distribution interconnection process a lot better.
Have you been involved at all in any virtual power plant investments? I know there's some interest here in.
We have not. Most of our off-take situations, our PPAs are all physical. So it's with an IOU. We have PPAs with some California IOUs. And a lot of instances we have PPAs with public power agencies that are physical PPAs. So no, we don't have, in California, it's a liquid market, so you can do a lot more. We're providing energy at this node and you're taking it at this node, but that's different than a virtual PPA in my opinion.
Okay. I'll take one more question here. Does Crossover or your parent company incorporate ESG principles into operations and investments?
Absolutely. Yeah. ESG, PRI, principles of responsible investing. We had an A+ rating by ESG in our last round of reporting. So yeah, we take it very seriously, and it's only getting better. I mean, we've started working with a few dedicated greenhouse gas reporting private entities that do a lot more sophisticated accounting to ensure that when people claim, or when investors like ourselves or our competitors, will hold them to the same candle, claim, certain ESG principles have been met. There's a lot more sophisticated accounting coming down the pipe, right? There's the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board that parallels the General Accounting Standards Board, and those are all things that we're heavily proponents of.
Sonia, I believe, has a couple questions here.
Yes, thank you, Cody, and thank you, Sean, so much
Yeah.
for your presentation. So we're hearing a lot of great information. I mean, and this is wonderful. I also just have a question to get your professional input on. Do you believe the expiration of the city franchise agreement is the right time to move forward and purchase public power?
Yeah, I mean that's a there's a lot of layers to that onion. But from an investment standpoint, yes, all right. I mean, as folks have alluded to, interest rates are at an all-time low, right? I mean, and that makes a huge difference in what our investors compete against too, right? I mean, and speaking of that investor, and I say it's a umbrella, right? Our investors are focused on redeploying their capital into programs that are both seen as positive moves in the investment area, right? So a lot more ESG style investing, a lot more focus on divestments in oil and gas, investments in renewable energy, and other types of programs like that. Yeah, so sorry, I had a train of thought there that passed by me.
No, that's great. And I mean, just real quick, and I guess this can be to you, to Ursula, or any of our panel, really. Other cities around the country are exploring public power as well. And Ursula, you also provided us a great example of some of these others that have been successful in their campaign. I also am curious, or we're allowing our audience to also hear some of the challenges that may, encounter in exploring public power. So, Ursula or Sean, if either one of you feel open in providing that information of what type of pushback, that maybe Boulder received, Chicago, Pueblo, Colorado, et cetera.
Yeah, I'll let Ursula. I think you're a lot closer to that membership than I.
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest hurdle is typically just the pushback from the incumbent utility. I mean, there are very rare instances where the incumbent utility is going to be a willing seller, and they do have significant amount of money, particularly in a large community like San Diego, that they're going to, they'll put up legal battles, they'll have PR campaigns that are going to make it very difficult. And I think, if you move forward with this, you do need to be prepared for that. I think, Boulder experienced that to some degree. There's a smaller community in Iowa, Decorah, Iowa, that, I don't know the exact number of customers, say it's 10,000 customers, but the investor-owned utility spent over $1 million in defeating that effort for a community of 10,000. when the community itself, had, a nominal amount of money to fight that. So I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle, and particularly with a large community like San Diego Gas and Electric is not easily they're not just going to give up and say, okay, let's negotiate. So I think you just have to be prepared for that.
So that scenario of willing seller, willing buyer is just something to be prepared for.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Back over to you, Cody.
First of all, thank you so much, Sean. That was wonderful. Appreciate that input.
Absolutely.
With that, we will shift to our next panelist, who is really a sort of giant in municipal utilities. He came originally, he has a storied career. He was at the American Public Power Association and then Florida Municipal Electric Association. He is currently the executive director of the California Municipal Utilities Association. And so we really could not have asked for a better person to talk about a lot of these issues that we're contemplating here tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Barry Moline. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Cody. I really appreciate it. And first, I want to say thank you to everyone for taking this issue on, and to become educated. An informed public is going to make a better decision. And I also want to thank Public Power San Diego for sponsoring the forum. So as Cody said, I'm Barry Moline. I'm the executive director of the California Municipal Utilities Association. And we represent 45 publicly owned utilities in California. We also work with about 50 water agencies across the state. That's just what we do. We work with both public electric and public water agencies. On the electric side, we support our publicly owned utilities, and they serve about 25% of the state's energy. Now, as the chief representative in California for the publicly owned utilities, you might expect me to strongly promote creating a new municipal utility here. And I want you to know that our association, which consists of just municipal utilities, we have no policy to create new municipal utilities. Our policy is only to provide information. There are currently no municipal electric utilities that are seeking to expand their own areas, and our goal is only to share facts. So the first, I want to share with you 4 thoughts. One is, can this be done? And the answer is absolutely. I think we're all recognizing that the road is bumpy, but it absolutely can be done. Now, since the 1980s, there's been 16 new municipal utilities created. And the majority were created in the 2000 to 2006 timeframe. One difference between those projects and what you're looking at in San Diego is those were greenfield projects. In other words, there was no infrastructure. There were no buildings. It was just land in communities where there was expected to be growth, but state law allows for a new municipal utility to be created in an area where there's no facilities today. So these are places that are generally small, and a lot of them are in Southern California. Moreno Valley, the City of Industry, Cerritos, Rancho Cucamonga, Victorville, Corona. These are some of the communities that came into being to create a municipal utility in the early 2000s. So what you're looking at here is a buyout of an existing utility, which is much harder, frankly, a little, and certainly more complicated. And in this case, as Sonia just mentioned, you need a willing buyer and a willing seller. And it's unclear what the status of buyers and sellers are at this moment. And that's why we're here learning about the situation and trying to understand the buying opportunity and what kind of position SDG&E might be in as a seller. So a question about renewable energy. Our municipal utilities engaged in? Are we leading in renewable energy? What's going on in that space? And the answer is, we are definitely leaders in renewable energy. But before I discuss a few, or what a few municipal utilities are doing, let me simply say that investor-owned utilities have invested heavily in renewable energy for many years. And that's in part a reflection of the aggressive goals that California has implemented, in public policy. So all utilities across the state are on track to decarbonize by 2045. Now that may speed up a bit if the legislature acts to move it along faster. And I think at some point they will. That's not our discussion today, but nevertheless, I think that, that could happen. Bottom line is the entire utility sector has invested heavily in clean energy. Now, one of the benefits of having a municipal electric utility is the ability to do what the people in your community want. And our local governing boards are the members of the community. So they're the ones that are listening to the customers directly. So for example, take SMUD. We've heard their name before. That's the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. And they have a goal to completely decarbonize by 2030. So that's a big goal, and they're moving down that road. The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, their goal is to be 100% renewable by 2045. Also a big goal, because the state's goal is to just be 60% renewable, and then by 2030. And then, so you can see LA's goal is much more aggressive. The other 40% is just zero carbon, like hydropower or large hydropower. Two other utilities have set very aggressive goals as well. For example, the city of Palo Alto is already 100% carbon neutral, and they do that by buying carbon offsets. And we've heard about the city of Alameda. They're 100% renewable today. So there are others, and I don't want to bore you by running down the list of all 45. The most important point is that as a public power community, your energy future is up to you. Ursula mentioned that earlier as well. And depending on what your goals are, you can accomplish those, because that's what the people do by voting for their governing boards and by and their governing boards acting. Now, Cody asked the question about decarbonization, and I also want to second what Ursula said. If that's your emphasis, that will be done. SMUD is making it their goal by 2030, when the state's goal is 2045. So that's the goal of the people of Sacramento. So they're doing that. So that's a direct response to Cody. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit more if you'd like. And Bill Powers talked a bit about rates, and he showed that chart that showed the where SDG&E is and the rest of the publicly owned utilities. He mentioned that on average, the municipal rates are 15% below the investor-owned utility rates. Now, in SDG&E's case, their rates are about 35% above municipal utility rates. And you may wonder why that is. Now, I don't have all the details, but in general, I can speak from the public utility perspective. And that is that our costs are discoverable through public records requests. And when you have sunshine in everything you do, there's no gold plating of costs, there's no profit incentive. So everything we do is open and competed to get the lowest cost. That's our philosophy. And I mean, we get the highest value. We want to make sure the work gets done, but we're looking at the lowest cost. Cody also asked about the model, and actually, Cody, I don't know if these are questions in the chat or if they're your questions, but nevertheless, the type of model. And the answer is, it depends. The models that exist today are a city-owned model where the governing board is the city council versus a separate utility authority, and that can have the structure of a public utility district or a municipal utility district. There's really not much difference between the two. Those have a governing board that is elected separately, and that governing board what I find in those utility districts is that they tend to be more focused and not as distracted by other city issues that are constantly coming up that city councils deal with. And I think that those boards and those utilities just tend to be a little more focused on what their community's needs are. But they both exist. So what does it take for this to happen? And so this is my final sort of set of points. And one is you need a reason, you need a rationale. And it's okay if there's multiple reasons, but you need a strong reason. Costs may be the issue for some, climate change and decarbonization may be the issue for others. Some may be interested in wildfire mitigation, but nevertheless, there has to be a strong rationale. And let me pause here and say that SDG&E really has been a leader in wildfire mitigation, and they're a great example for all utilities in the state. But nevertheless, you need several reasons to make it happen. And you can hear my security alarm going off maybe in the background. In order to get this done, it has to be feasible. And let me be clear that technologically, financially, managerially, it can be done, no problem. Seattle is doing it, Los Angeles is doing it, Sacramento, Austin, San Antonio, Phoenix. San Diego is a sophisticated place. You can do this if you want to. You need political will. You have to recognize that this is nuclear war. For SDG&E, it's an existential issue. If you win, then they will see it as losing. So you have to have the intestinal fortitude to persevere to get what you want. And I see a lot of energy in the group and in the participants here. So what SDG will do is they're going to do everything they can to get city commissioners elected who will be friendly to them, to delay this as long as possible, to try to get candidates that support their side. Delaying is a tactic we see all over the country. Delay, 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 and hope that the community just loses interest. Finally, labor has to be held harmless. And we've talked a little bit about this as well. If labor loses a penny in this transaction, they'll claim that you're taking food from their families' mouths. And I say that not to be sarcastic, but I've seen it done. I've seen that messaging been done elsewhere, and you need to hear it from me first before you see their own tactics. I'm not saying labor is bad, not at all. They need to be either neutral or on your side. So labor has to be kept whole. There's no difference in the way labor is treated between publicly owned utilities and investor-owned utilities, none whatsoever. We have the same labor agreements. So that's just not an issue. Bill Powers mentioned that, he discussed the concept that labor would work for a new San Diego Utility Authority, and that's my name, I'm just calling it that, under the exact same arrangements. And that's true. That could easily happen. Same arrangements, no changes whatsoever, everything done with labor working as a private contractor. So not working, working for the public agency, but as a private contractor. So it's completely doable. I've seen that model before, and it works to keep labor whole. So that concludes my remarks, and I look forward to discussion, either Q&A if you have any specific questions of me or among the entire panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barry. We appreciate your expertise and your willingness to join us today. And so there is another question I want to start off on our Q&A, and we do have some others, is can you share with us the record of reliability with public power electricity entities in the state of California?
Well, I don't have the reliability numbers in front of me. I can tell you that they're excellent. And the reason why is there's in part two reasons. One goes to sort of what we talked about earlier, which is when you are accountable to the community, if there's a problem with reliability, it gets brought up publicly at a utility board meeting. People come in and they talk about problems they're having with reliability, and it gets fixed. So when there is public accountability, sunshine, those things are addressed directly. And the second is more of a physical answer, is that public land utilities tend to be more urban, and there's fewer trees, fewer forested areas and so on. So it's while we definitely have to manage the vegetation around our lines, we do have the benefit of not having as many rural areas. So that's just a geographic reason. It's not that we're better. That's just the simple case. So, but in general, our reliability is outstanding, and we'd have to get the numbers. And I bet Bill, who probably has a line on that directly, he probably has called up that screen already.
On his speed dial, right? Yeah, I agree. So I have another question to ask you in relationship to the California Public Utilities Commission. So would the California Public Utilities Commission continue to exercise control over the power delivery in San Diego if the city opts to become a public power utility?
The direct answer is no. The governing, well, and there's an important understanding. I don't want to say distinction, but it's important to understand how regulation takes place in the state, and that is the rates and the programs would be regulated by the local governing board, the local elected governing board. So everything that happens locally is the responsibility of that governing board. Public land utilities follow the structure of regulation of the investor-owned utilities as they're regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. So for things like safety, wildfire mitigation, all these issues, we look very closely at what the investor-owned utilities do, and the CPUC, the Public Utilities Commission, does actually oversee some elements of our operation. So, but they're the operational elements and not necessarily the rate related elements. So the point is, from the perspective of best practices, there's not much of a difference between an investor-owned utility and a publicly owned utility. Everybody's trying to keep the lights on for their communities.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And I do have another question from one of our participants as well, and it's related to net metering. And so there is a big effort right now, or I can't say right now, it seems like it's continuously, some attacks on our solar customers. And so my question is, we have the IOUs and California legislators that seem to be having a motion towards attacking the rooftop solar here in California with new proposals for net energy metering. So could you confirm that public power agencies in California are not subject to those aggressive net metering limitations?
The answer to the question is where public land utilities are not subject to those net metering limitations. So all the net metering policies would be addressed locally.
Oh, wow. I think
would be identified, implemented locally, whatever the community wants.
Okay, great. Thank you. Cody, thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Cody. He may also have some other questions from our audience or community, or?
No, I think we're kind of, we're running short on time here a little bit.
Okay.
Barry, that was great. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate collaboration tonight. It's always good to have, this panel is really the best of the best. So it's really a pleasure to have you. We really appreciate it. Sonia, should I make a few closing remarks and then?
Yes, if you don't have additional time for any other Q&A, we will definitely.
I see there's a question about what our public power utility is doing about electric vehicle charging.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And, in the electric utility industry, everyone is moving, I'd say either aggressively or assertively they're moving, into the electric vehicle space. A lot of it is a reflection of the community. So there are some public power agencies that are in rural areas where their communities don't have as many, they don't have the same level of interest in electric vehicles, but we keep very close tabs on the electric vehicles that are purchased in the state or in each community. There's a network of electric vehicle. There's an electric vehicle industrial complex, put it that way, where we are informed of the electric vehicles that are purchased and are sort of operating in each community. All the utilities work together on this. So clearly the urban utilities are very aggressively working in that regard. And that's the same as true with the investor-owned utilities. Everybody would like to expand the electric vehicle space. There's a lot of infrastructure that's going in. The next question is SDG&E is trying to monopolize the charging stations. What I can tell you is that the charging stations that are going in publicly owned utilities are generally third-party electric vehicle charging stations. They're not owned by the city or the utility.
And Barry, just to be clear about are there any municipal utilities that are joint powers authority? Are they all within the bounds of a particular municipality, or have any municipalities joined together with other municipalities in the joint powers authority?
There are several joint powers authorities in the state. And what we're talking about is groups of municipal utilities that join together specifically to buy power. So if you have small utilities and they have a need, each one has a need for, we do a lot of renewable energy projects together. So each one has a small need for renewable energy. Then joining together, you get more economies of scale and lower prices. So we have two fairly significant size joint power agencies that do exactly that. They buy power, a lot of renewable projects on behalf of all their members.
And presumably, given that there hasn't been any recent conversions to public power, presumably there's not a lot of examples of an articulation between a municipal or a district utility and community choice energy aggregator or joint powers authority. Can you are there examples of those forms of articulation, or can you kind of hypothesize about how that might work?
Well, the two effectively dovetail. You don't have community choice aggregators in the areas where there's a publicly owned utility because they would be one and the same. The CCA is buying power, so and delivering it across the local utilities lines. The publicly owned utility is buying power and delivering it across its lines. So you'd have the same governing board, governing both. But the point is that they can easily coexist or work together or join together. If they, I know there's a CCA in the San Diego area, so you want that there would be a dovetailing of the efforts of both organizations.
Sonia, do you have any additional questions?
No, not at this time, Cody, unless there's any departing words that Barry may want to share with us as we are coming to a close.
Only that it's as I said in my talk, it's to it can be an uphill battle. It can feel like a huge fight, but I don't have the exact quote. But it was I think Jane Goodall. Somebody will tell us in a second, or Gandhi. But they said that it was definitely a woman who said it. That it's amazing what a group of people can do. I think they said it was a small group of people can do, and we'll look for that quote as it comes through in the chat. And the point is, Margaret Mead said it. Thank you. And I still haven't gotten the quote right, but the point is, I have seen this over and over again, and I know Ursula has seen it, and others who have paid attention to what other communities have done who have created municipal utilities or engaged in the fight to get some benefit or value. And that is that when you fight and you fight for a cause and you know what you want, as long as you stick to it, there's a good chance that you'll win. So the issue is persistence.
Thanks. Cody, take it away.
Thank you, Barry. That was great. If these folks have anything, it is definitely persistence. Thank you, Barry. So I'll just say a few closing words here. And we have the quote, the Margaret Mead quote here, never underestimate what a small group of committed people can accomplish. So I just want to talk about, there's the two sides of this. There's people organizing their communities in this sort of heroic or heroinic way. And then there's this sort of conjuncture that people find themselves in, these sort of like the structural things that as I always say that the future is not featureless. Things are happening in the global economy. They're happening in governance. And so I just want to briefly sort of summarize some of the things folks have said and that some of the experiences public power has had in its sort of formative time. And that is that we are in a very unique position. Public power obviously comes from a place on the left of the spectrum in terms of most of the people organizing, but we're in this rare conjunction where really public power at this point is not a left-right issue. It's really a sort of a ratepayer monopoly issue, and that becomes very evident in a lot of the elements of this conjuncture. And so let me just very briefly in closing sort of lay some of those out and kind of set the scene for what's happening. Obviously, as many have pointed out, you have a 50-year franchise agreement coming to a close. That's the mise en scène, the curtains open and that's what's happening. And that explains a lot of why public power formed and why we're at this conjuncture. The other hand, a lot of people have mentioned we have interest rates that are at historic lows. In 1970, I think we're at like 7%. Fed funds rate was at 7% or something. It went up in the 80s, went up to 13%. Your Fed funds rate's at 0.25%. Your prime rate's at about 3.25%. Your 10-year munis at yielding 1%. I mean, this is unheard of. It's basically free money, which means that in terms of putting a bond on the ballot, the cost of money is very, very low in terms of acquiring the underlying assets. You have a spread. The other factor is you have the CPUC has a guaranteed or an authorized return on equity of 10.2%. In 2019, SDG&E actually achieved a 12% return on equity. So you have a spread between the rate at which you can acquire capital and the alternative, which is the fee you basically have to pay, the additional 10.2% profit you have to pay to the shareholders of SDG&E. So that is a part of what, and us being under the CPUC and under that necessity of paying with our rates, that profit is part of what opens up the opening for public power. And part of what shifts it from being a left-right issue in terms of like people who want public power as a matter of principle and democratic governance to being a ratepayer versus shareholder conflict, which is very stark at this point because of that spread between your interest rates and the 10.2% guaranteed return on equity. And I think that that's reflected in the JVJ Pacific report and the Nugent report as well, that the Mayor Faulkner contracted last year. And so I think this is those are the two major parts. You have the end of a franchise and you have a spread between interest rates and your guaranteed return on equity for SDG&E. And I think you have a number of other elements. You have a shift in political power and political ideology that is going. We now have a Democratic mayor. We have a Democratic supermajority or super majority. Almost. We'll see what happens in the next election, but it's almost a Democratic totality. And there is, and to be fair to Faulkner, he was not that big of a cheerleader for SDG&E. He was already a little bit soft. And you also have, so that's one factor. You also have essentially a pro-labor sentiment throughout the political spectrum. You have a shift in perception around labor. Certainly in San Diego, labor, everyone I know involved in this is very much pro-labor. So you have an environment, and obviously we have business unionism. A lot of the trades are going to be supporting the corporations for which they work, or the contractors for which they work. That's natural. So we understand that that's happening. But if you look at the near certainty that we would have a commitment to make labor whole, and we look at what's happened with IBW 18 and with LADWP, with IBW 1245, with SMUD, you have a very attractive environment in terms of making labor whole, as Barry Moline called it. And so in that sense, we will probably, in this kind of effort, you would probably see some opposition from organized labor, but there was also recognition across the spectrum that in fact, there's a near certainty that labor would be made whole. They don't like the uncertainty, and that's natural, and they'll fight for that. You also have community choice energy, in which the exit fees are a major, everyone is committed to community choice energy here. But now we see that these exit fees are an onerous element. And so there's a real drive to try to overcome the function of the CPUC to enforce these onerous exit fees, which are really an impediment to the success of community choice energy. Finally, and in some ways, not most importantly, those are all very important, you have a growing consensus around a need for dramatic climate action. And I think a lot of the members of the coalition are motivated by this. And to be honest, a lot of SDG, and here's where the SDG&E-Sempra relationship is really fundamental. A lot of SDG&E staff are great. They're great people. I know them. I work with them. They're genuinely committed to electrification. In fact, for them, putting their electricity in your electric car is better for them than you putting Chevron's gas in your car. That's like, they're fine with that. Unfortunately, their parent company is a major natural gas, is a fossil fuel company, Sempra, which creates a certain level of tension between SDG&E and their parent company, and is part of why there's resistance to transitioning as fast as we would like. And it, again, makes it more attractive to have a public power alternative, which would actually go full bore toward that transition. I would say all of that put together, and I'm coming to a close here, means that, you know, for a lot of us in organizing this, it is like a battle of good versus evil, and this sort of end of the world type struggle for like democracy, and there is that element. But I would say there's also, we're at this very unique conjuncture that I just laid out, in which the logic of the situation, in which even a fiscal conservative would look at this thing and say, wow, just look at that spread between your interest rates and your guaranteed, your authorized return on equity for SDG&E. That spread is just, like Golub said in his analysis, and like Nugent said in their analysis, in 5 out of 6 of the scenarios, it was advantageous to go public. And the 6th scenario, honestly, on the electricity side, is really just in there so they didn't have to say it was all 6 scenarios. There's really very, very, very few scenarios in which it is not economically advantageous for your ratepayers to shift over to public power. So what I would say is, moving forward, I think I'm no longer active in the coalition. Or in public power. I'm sort of a sympathizer now. But what I would say in terms of the effort for public power, I think public power is on the verge of shifting to a paradigm in which it is no longer a left-right issue, in which it's no longer an issue about having to convince people strictly on the level of their values or their ideology. The facts are right there. We are at a conjuncture in history in which it honestly does no longer make sense to stay with an investor-owned utility. It's extraordinarily clear, and it's why the fallback is to talk about it is for SDG&E to threaten litigation, because it's very hard to make a case that, in fact, look at 2019, SDG&E achieved a 12% return on equity. That's $1 million a day of profits going straight to shareholders. So when you see that kind of a spread between interest rates and return on equity for SDG&E, it just is no longer even an ethical or ideological or a spiritual battle. It is just sheer reason and common sense. So with that said, I'm so proud of all the organizers of PPSD. You've done amazing work. I'm so thankful that a lot of elected officials, representatives are here tonight. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to Sonia, who was really central to this thing. Thank you, Sonia, for allowing me to participate. And I'm just so eager to see where all of you take this movement.
Thank you so much. On that, everyone, thank you for joining. If you have any follow-up or if you want to stay in touch with our movement, you can contact me and I will put my email in the chat now. Thank you so much.